eventually, I guess all the things accumulated to lead from one thing to another to eventually lead to God. But that entire time was basically me searching for and crying out to God the entire time. I just had no clue that that's what I was doing.
Wow, that's so beautiful. And we haven't even started. So we're going to get
Okay.
started. Let me do my little intro real quick, and then we can get even deeper into this conversation.
Sure.
Hey, y'all. Welcome back to another episode of Burgeoning the Podcast. My name is Leah J, and I am here with a lot to say. This is a guest episode, and y'all know we love a guest episode. I am here with an old friend, Mr. Cade Bergman.
Yo.
He is a friend that I met at the College of Charleston. The way we met was kind of crazy. We'll get into it in just a second, but we were trying to get a job. We were both trying to get a job, and we were low-key competing against each other for the job. But our group interview went so well that she gave us both a job, and nobody else in the group got the job. And
That
then
was huge.
that was so huge. And then not only that, she made us partners. So I guess our chemistry was great. That great.
So
But he is a content creator, and I'm going to let him get into that. I'm past the mic really soon, but I do want to say, like, this is a man of God. Like, he is a man of God, and that is what connects us even more, even deeper than where we were before in our first half of knowing each other. I'm glad to have another brother in Christ. So I'm going to allow him to introduce himself and tell a little about what he's doing.
Thank you. And thank you for having me on your show. Been watching, keeping track, so I'm doing a great job. And so, we literally met in a job interview. So that is pretty funny. And the fact that we both got the job is even better. So shout out Steph. Shout out Steph for that.
Yes.
But I started the career. I've been doing videos on YouTube for like 10 years. So I've been doing that basically my entire life. I've been doing videos. It's just always the common denominator, no matter what I was doing. Started with soccer videos in 2009, moved to fitness, moved to vlogs, went to podcasts. And then eventually on this long trip where I was living in a car, I basically right out of college was like, I need to go find myself or whatever that means. And had not heard the gospel, didn't know anything about it, didn't know that's what I was chasing. I was just chasing myself or something in some new age spiritual aspect that I was seeing all over TikTok that was blowing up, this ascension to the fifth dimension, Buddha and all these things. So that's kind of what I was had in my back corner, I guess. And hopped in this car, had a bunch of weed, had a bunch of drugs with me, and that was kind of like my way to find myself and whatnot. And so did that whole trip, driving all over the country, living in this car by myself, and then eventually made a video. I was getting super into finances because I was like, how am I going to make money? Like I have this college degree, but I don't know what to do with it. And I have this restaurant job and I don't know where this is going to go. And I eventually made a video on this NFT run that was going crazy. And I got in relatively early on that. I had no idea what I was really doing. So I just made these review videos and podcasts because I was like, okay, well, I have no idea if this industry has legs, but someone in this industry has legs because there are really successful people here. So I'll try and connect with these professionals kind of, and I'll make videos that aren't going to get a million views, because I don't know what I'm doing with trading. That's all the videos that are getting views. But I'll make videos that these founders and these CEOs will maybe see, which are reviews and podcasts and this higher level of content. And started making a bunch of that style of content. Did NFT stuff for a couple of years, and then shifted into a broader crypto market in general, and crypto and finance market. Was able to connect with some top level people who are killing it in their side. They're a bit more from the finance and stock world, and then one of them is big in the crypto world. And so I've been working with them. But the role has changed. But in the last 3 or 4 years, it's just been content creation, whether it's on YouTube or if I'm leaning on TikTok more. And I've just been throughout that process. It's basically been just like forming me. And now that I understand a little bit more, I'm like, oh, wow, that's crazy that you've been doing that this entire time. Like it makes perfect sense why I went through this like 3-year gap and like why this happened, that happened. And so, a few months ago, I started I guess we'll get into that, but I was saved like a year ago or so, sometime last year. I think it was July. And it was so hard for me not to make videos because I was so like on fire about everything, but I realized I had no idea what I was talking about yet. I hadn't even read the Bible or anything like that. So I was like, okay, let me learn. So I basically canceled all my calls, canceled everything I had for the next 3 or 4 months, and just dove into reading and then researching, talking to people, and trying to live out and change and stuff like that. But it's been a wild little ride. So I'll stop talking there.
That just blows my mind. Like, I've heard of like God calling us into isolation. Like I feel like I was called into an isolation where my story, like God literally chose, not The Chosen Cup.
Oh,
My
of course.
sister loves The Chosen. I have to watch
I
it.
love The Chosen.
Um
It's the best show ever.
yes. I've caught pieces of it, but I haven't watched the whole thing.
No, it is actually the best show ever. It's genuinely very well made, and the scenes kill it. And it came at the most perfect time of my journey. It was right when I needed to see kind of like what did he mean by this? Like what could it have felt like? I needed like the emotional tug, and then man, I dove into the scriptures after that. It was very powerful.
Wow, yeah. That is so amazing. That is so amazing how different the journeys can be and how God presents himself in all things. Like God is in all realms. Like you're in content creation, but yet you found Jesus and found God in this space, still. And what I was saying, what my thought was is that you pulled yourself into isolation. Like you said, I'm going to isolate and I'm going to focus and I'm going to learn. That don't always happen for people. Like they don't have that hunger. So that's amazing. That's an amazing start. I guess my question is like in those 3 months, because you said that you were in an isolation before when you were like traveling and doing the van life thing, but in that time where you were isolated here versus the van life isolation, like what did that look like as far as spiritually?
Yeah, so the car was actually 6 months, and it was the longest 6 months of my entire life. And because I'm living in this little cubicle of a Prius that had turned into a car and morphed into a livable situation. So I was living in that car, bouncing from Walmart parking lot to hotel parking lot, running in, like stealing breakfast from the hotel, like pretending that I was that I like. It was just this. It was just like, but I was also broke. I was actually broke during that time because the crypto market had crashed. That was like all my money in there, and so I had like DoorDash that I was doing a little bit on the side. But I was like basically had like was fighting between $50 and $150 in my bank account for like months during that time. So it felt like a bit like I wasn't moving anywhere. And during that time, I was watching Tom Bilyeu's Impact Theory podcast, and his track record of consistently posting and consistently aiming up was very helpful for me during that time because I was in this full on depression, just like barely keeping myself afloat, just like smoking tons of weed and all this stuff. And during that time, it was very difficult because I didn't know where exactly I was aiming. I didn't have exactly a North Star, which can be dangerous in the sense that you will latch onto whatever sounds right at the time. And so I definitely went down some very dark paths because the good thing was I was always in search of the highest good, which there's only one answer there. So no matter what I was doing, I was aiming that direction. So even though I would descend into the pits, I would always come out because I wasn't really trying to live there. I wasn't trying to be there. I was trying to aim up always. I knew where up was. I was just very easily distracted. I could go left and then go right. Like there's all these side quests that I would take for no reason, just because I would get impatient or whatever. But the time of isolation during that was rough because I numbed myself for most of that. Like pretty much the entirety of it, I was numbing out. And so for essentially from 2020 until 2000 until last year, about a year ago, I was just like hooked and numb and just doing whatever drugs. It was like all the psychedelic drugs had intrigued me because it was like this spiritual exploration. That's just what I thought it was, and that's mainly what I used them for. Yeah, it got crazy. It got crazy during that time, and so in contrast, when after I was saved, and there's a whole lot of details that go into that. I can talk about some of them, but essentially it was like 15 years of dealing with this stuff that was deep down rooted and rotten inside. That sort of manifests into this big old tree with a bunch of rotten fruit that I was dealing with now at this time. And I got to a breaking point. Yeah, I got to this breaking point of like, okay, well, a whole host of factors carried into this thing where it all kind of led to a couple days where everything needed to be sorted. And I understood that it needed to be sorted the next couple days. And I was like, okay, well, I've been trying to sort this for like 10 years. So like, I don't know if it's going to work. Like I've tried everything. I've tried every drug. I've tried every new age thing. I've tried meditation. I've tried yoga. I've done every single thing.
But
And
have
I've
you
been reading
tried
about this
Jesus?
dude. Yeah, also I've been reading about this dude. I don't know. I watched this movie and like, all these things. Like he seems to have been pretty solid overall. Like, I don't know. But I don't get it though. Cause I was raised in this agnostic scientific house. So I was like, what am I supposed to do? Like, I don't see you, you know what I mean? Like, where am I supposed to go with this? And so
Hmm.
I sort of just like dealt with that for a couple of days. And then finally, just like broke down essentially and was like, I feel like I'm stuck in this hole. No matter how much I build myself up, no matter how fast I get, I can't outrun this hole. I'm still stuck in the pit. And like the only way out is for someone to reach down and grab me and pull me up. And I sort of acknowledged that, and then I just sort of fell to my knees and then broke down in the middle of Seattle at like 2 a.m. and was like, okay, look, if you can take this guilt and shame and all this stuff you've got on me that's weighing me down and actually let me live, then I'm down. I will follow you. I don't know what that means yet, but I will try this. But there's no way it's going to work probably, but I'm still going to try it. And so I went all in with it. And I can't explain what had happened in that moment, but it was just over. Like, it felt like the movie all led to 1 second, and then it's just like, boom, over. And I have no other way to describe it other than just literally just it sounds so cheesy when I say it for me because I'm so new, but it's literally just the authority of Christ that could do something like that in a moment that was so intense. And I could not explain. I just remember breaking down and then just being like I felt like there was silence for real for a second. And I was like, whoa,
Wow.
what just happened? Like, I've done every drug ever. I'm sober right now. It's just not a drug. Something just happened, and it was a million times more powerful than anything I'd ever experienced in my life.
Oh, wow.
And that next day, it felt like my life actually began. And then it was about 3 to 4 months of just figuring out who he was, reading, researching every question I had against this church and that church and this person and this thing that happened. I researched every single one. Like Leah, I had probably 150 tabs on my computer for a solid 3 or 4 months straight. And it was exhausting because I was like, okay, one question answered, next. One question answered, next. And it was just like over and over and over. And during that night, overnight, every single addiction I had, essentially, other than like one, disappeared overnight. I couldn't explain it, and that's why it was so unbelievable. Because I was struggling with the weed addiction, of course, the drug addiction. I was 1 day away from starting to sell mushrooms and dive into that world, so that would have been great. And literally overnight, he was like, "Nah, it's time. Like, you're about to go down." Like,
Yes.
So the overnight just lost the desire for any of that stuff, and it's crazy, like absolutely insane.
Wow. It sounds like you died. It sounds like you died, and you a part of being a born again Christian is that we have to die. Like, we have to kill our old selves. And that is what I'm getting from your story. Like, there's been this crazy transformation. I was in tears a little bit. Like, I was trying to keep the smile up to like keep the tears in, but hearing that, it's just the power of God, like where he'll go to get you. Like you said, you're in that dark space for 6 months. You said that like it was still like years of this. I don't know. Like, even when you found a little bit of direction, like it was still in dark space. And last season, I talked about this dark spot that God brought me out of, and I can just see it. Like, it feels as if we're just in the lowest part, but like you said, he reaches in and he pulled you out. That is so amazing. Like, that is the story of a Christian. Like, that is the story of somebody who is like saying, I do surrender to Christ. Like, it's not cheesy. It's not cheesy at all, because it's a constant thing. Like, now you're here, but that's just the start of a journey, right? That 150 tabs is real. Like, trying to get these questions answered. I have notebooks full of just questions like, why? Yeah. But I'm reading this, but like, Lord, why? I was listening to a sermon this morning, and I was like, how could they say that? Like, what were you doing here? Like, God, what is this about? Like, the questions don't stop. The questions don't stop, but it helps us to continue to grow. So we've talked a lot about like where you were, where you are currently, or, you know, where this all began. But is that the spot that you want to continue to talk about as far as your burgeoning journey? Like, is that that point for you?
So I thought about that question for a little while. I left out a bunch of details that would maybe give context, but. So during that, like leading up to that night, basically, which was right around my 25th birthday, there was a whole host of like really terrifying stuff that had happened that had it was like the seasoning to get me prepared to surrender, because there's no way I was going to humble myself to that level. I was way too arrogant. I was way too sure of myself to do anything like that. So I essentially had watched this movie which is the first breaking point. It was called Sound of Freedom. People have said their things about it. I've heard both sides of this argument about what was the goal of this movie. It was essentially about child trafficking, and had sort of opened my eyes. I had worked in there with Darkness to Light in college, so it was a bit of a it was a bit more connected to that movie, and to see that, and you know, all the politics aside from that movie, it sort of opened my eyes to true evil, and I was like, I don't understand how. I couldn't reconcile in my head how a human being could do that. And so there was this podcast where the guys from that movie who went out and saved these children went on and talked about it with this psychology, with Jordan Peterson, this guy. And they're like, yeah, I don't understand how someone does get to that point. And he said, it comes from 1,000 paper cuts, from watching the wrong stuff online and then watching the worst of that kind of content. And then you slowly descend and you sort of become a demon, but you don't realize it. You're normal. The standard for normal gets lower and lower until you're literally living in hell. And then, because that's why they don't really see nothing wrong with it. They're just kind of like, oh, it's just what I'm doing. Like, no problem. They somehow live with themselves. And I was like, there's no, like, I would never do that. But then it had like a few reality checks. I was like, wait a second. There's these experiments at the Stanford prison experiment where normal people go from normal to a couple of days later turning into the worst version of themselves just based on circumstance. And there was this guy commentating. He's like, it's so arrogant for you to think that you wouldn't do that just because you're watching this video afterwards and you get to this beautiful picture of what it looked like. There's no reason to think that if you had been in those shoes, you wouldn't have descended into, you know, the most degenerate version of yourself. And I was like, wow, that's actually true. And I started to observe a bit of reality, the people around me. I was living in the city where a lot of degenerate behavior happens. And I was like, wait a second. I think we need rules. I think boundaries are actually, like, I think it makes sense, actually. Like, I started to understand my parents a little bit more. I was like, oh, like, it's actually good that they said no to some of these things, even though it was really annoying at that time. And started to change the way I thought about things. And then during that time, I was in this, there's this person in my life who, how do I even say this? It wasn't anyone I was dating. It wasn't any kind of romantic thing. At least I didn't think it was. And so that was not exactly the case. So I'll leave out some of the details, but essentially it turned into just like a horrible situation of stalking type of vibe. Have you seen the movie In and Out? Or not In and Out. Have you seen the movie Get Out?
Yes.
Okay. It was those vibes for like a month straight. It was like to the point where I was carrying a knife on me 24/7 and I was scared for my life for a month.
Oh my gosh. So she was stalking you, or they were stalking you?
It was a bunch of terrifying behavior from that end. Banging on the door at 3 a.m.
Oh wow.
You know, hanging outside my room because she lived in the apartment building with me, and a whole host of stuff. Leaving things outside my door. She was into all this new age stuff. I was starting to open up to the spiritual world, so I was like, wait a second. Oh wait. This is bad. This is real bad. And so for 4 weeks, I was on edge and like realizing to myself that, hold on, like I don't really got it like this. I don't think I'm nearly as put together as I maybe hoped I was. And so it kind of primed me all the way up to finally like turning to Christ a little bit, reading the scriptures, seeing how, you know, Jesus' mother Mary was so like obedient to the way. She was like, this is the way. Like, this is what I was told is the truth revealed by God. So I'm going to do it. I'm going to follow through with all of it. And it was so inspiring to see certain characters in the Bible, like, give up themselves because they knew this was what needed to happen. And it was like so powerful. And eventually it was just, it helped me kind of cling to something, and it was just primed. And it was essentially for weeks asking me, it's like, are you ready to give it up? Are you ready to ask? Are you ready to
surrender?
To, like, do the thing, you know? And it's insane. So I would say the burgeoning, there's probably multiple answers I could have given, but during that time, it was about a month and a half to 2 months of God saying, okay, we're about to begin this period, and it's going to be so miserable that there's no outcome other than you're going to come to me.
Right. Oh, that ending of like, my life is so bad. My life is just, like, I'm just going to go to God. Like, I got nothing else. Like,
and I've tried other things. I've gotten to that point. It was nowhere near as intense now that I'm looking back, but at that time it was the most intense thing. And I would turn to acid, I would turn to DMT or whatever these psychedelic drugs were, and it would give me some type of very, very temporary feeling of okay, I understand the world or something like that. And it'd be like, oh, everything's connected. Woo, wah, wah. And then like 4 hours later, when I sobered up, nothing had changed at all internally. It was just I just got high, and it was starting to like weigh on me that how kind of like. Not embarrassing, but I was kind of like, wait a second. I've been thinking I'm doing all this stuff, but I'm really just taking drugs. This is not that cool, actually. And it was kind of embarrassing now. So it all led me there. So I'm glad it happened. But man, not as nearly as cool as I thought it was.
Yeah, it's like crystals. Oh my gosh, I was a big crystal girly. Like I haven't admitted this on the podcast yet. So first time we're saying this here, but I was a big crystal girly. Like I was using things that God put on our earth, just like drugs. I was like a weed. I smoked a lot of weed too. So I understand that. And I thank God that I've been delivered from that. But like I was using all of these things that he put on earth for us to have some sort of enlightenment or help us along the way, but like making gods out of those things. And that is literally in the Bible. Like you don't build idols. Don't build idols out of where it be people, things, weed, drugs, alcohol, like whatever it is. Like they're not God. It will never ever give you the satisfaction or the safety, the security that God gives us. Like nothing in this earth can do that for us except for surrendering to the salvation. Like that is all that we can ever do. So I definitely understand like that spiritual journey that led you to the surrender. Like I empathize with you so much there because it's hard. It's hard to go and be in search of something, be in search of self in such a way, or in search of the higher power, the higher self. Like I never ever thought about hurting no kids. That is just not me. But you're right. Like the ugly versions of ourselves, we are capable of having that if we don't have light. Like ugly things can grow in darkness, but light is always there. There is no darkness without light. Darkness is not the absence of light, it's the distance of it, the distance from it. So all it is getting closer to the light. Like that is what it is, like going in pursuit of. But meeting God there and saying, hey, I see you, I'll open my eyes to you, like that's a beautiful and real story. I kind of want to touch on the knife thing, but I don't think we got time for that. And it also
up to you. Totally up to you.
How did you get out of that? Like, are you safe now? Like, is it a thing?
I moved. I literally had to move. Yeah. So I moved, and it was insane because it's like a funny story because one of my good friends, Leanne and Cruz, literally that friendship I have with those two is kind of insane. We're all best friends now. And that friendship came because I moved to Seattle. And there were the two other content creators in the game, basically. And they were like, yo, I live like half a mile away from you. They're like, you should come over. And so we all hung out. They were dating. So it was like the perfect, what's it called when what's it called on the third person in, when you're always hanging out?
Third wheel.
The third wheel. So but it was fine. I had always been in that type of, it was always like that. So I've always had those relationships. So I don't know if that's God trying to be like, hey, here's some like cool Christian folks who are dating. You should like learn to see what it's like from a few different close relationships. So it was actually kind of cool, but they became really close friends. And during that time, hung out with them all the time. So it was like great to have like a second home that I could lean into. So during that month, I was over there a whole lot, and they kind of knew what was going on a little bit. But I had closed myself off a bit. But yeah, during that time, I had essentially just locked myself away and would hide and sneak in and out and be always peering behind alleyways to make sure I wasn't going to run into this person. And I realized it was the push I needed to get out of the city. I'd been wanting to leave for a little while, but then things started to look differently. I was like, wait a second, this is like not even safe anymore. And so then I started, and this is right when I was getting into stuff. There's a story I tell that I don't always add it into the story because I don't know if it is always relevant, but I guess it makes sense here. So I can't remember exactly when this was, but one of the reasons I came to the Christian God in particular was because this man on YouTube, this cowboy, his name's Daryl, I think, from the Dry Creek Wrangler School YouTube channel. He's this literal cowboy, and he just sets up a camera and he just smokes a pipe and just talks. He's like Gandalf from Lord of the Rings, and he just drops wisdom. And so one day he's like, all right, top 3 books. He goes, well, if you like any of my books or any of my videos, then you should just read a King James Bible. This is a good place to start. He goes, I'm not saying this is the right one or whatever, but just read one of these things. It doesn't matter if you're religious. Just read the book.
It's such a good book.
Just read the book. And I was like, all right. Yeah, I was like, okay, I've read every other self-help book. I read this thing. It's been around for a few thousand years. It's probably got something good in it. And
They
so
remixed it a
when I
couple
read it,
times.
this is the craziest thing. Yeah. I was like, let me read this thing. So like, what's crazy is I had been open to the idea of religion at this point. So I was sort of primed, and I had gotten the book, and I was like, okay, time to read. So I started to read the Old Testament. It was really confusing. I didn't have the context on things. So I was like, went online. They were like, hey, maybe start with the gospel. Like maybe just start there. Just read one of those, then see where you go. Maybe bounce from here to here. I was like, okay. So I read, and I think I started with Matthew or whatever the first New Testament book is. And the very first line in red, which is something that Jesus says or comes from Jesus, I'm in this Seattle studio apartment. I have a chandelier. It's nothing fancy, but it's I guess it's called a chandelier. It's like a hanging light. And I'm reading this book, and the second I get to the line in red, this thing, and this is 1 minute into reading this book, the thing rips out of the ceiling and comes within like an inch of decapitating me. Almost died right there. And I remember just being like, what just happened? Why did that just rip out? It tore out of the ceiling like in a movie.
Not the enemy didn't want you to know Jesus.
And what's crazy is when I tell you why it happened, because I found out why a few weeks later. So right after this, I get, and I'm like in shock. So I'm like, not sure what to do at this point. I'm like, that just happened. And then about 30 seconds later, I get a knock. Like, it was like super abrupt. I was already like, what's going on?
Almost died.
And I'm like, yo.
Now death is knocking.
Oh man, I hate this. And I was like, okay, I'll just open the door. And like, I open the door and it's my landlord. He's like, hey, he's got this really concerned look. I'm like, hey, what's going on? He's like, is someone trying to kill you? And I was like, well, funny you say that, but no, I don't think so. And he was like, well, there's this note if you look down. So I looked down at my feet, and there's this note written in blood. And it's written in blood, and it says boundaries. And it was from this person I had told you about. And at this point, I had distanced myself from their life. I was trying to get out of their life. There was all these like really heavy conversations. I was like, listen, I'm doing all these things. I'm sorry, but I just can't. I can't like meet with you and talk to you about these things anymore. It's too heavy, whatever. And she seemed like it was fine at that time. It clearly wasn't. But essentially, she was going through some of her own battles. And I guess she was thinking that I was maybe stalking her. And I was like, bro, promise you I was not stalking you. I've been trying to get out of your life. There's no reason I would insert myself in. So I think she was thinking something was wrong and that she needed to like come say this boundary thing. And I didn't know what was going on. But essentially, that was like my start to reading this book, was like all these crazy things happening. So that later that day, I go on a run. So I'm like, I gotta clear my head.
You do.
So I go on a run, and I don't know if you've ever run, but like typically people don't stop you when you're running. Like I don't know, I've never been stopped on a jog, maybe like once ever, but I get stopped 3 times on this 2-mile run. I get stopped 3 separate times from people, just random people, to ask me something or whatever it was, and I was just so confused. Like, what is going on? Like, am I being like harassed right now from like random people? Is this like, what is going on? And then I get a phone call when I'm a block away from my house. This random person from Charleston, 843 number. It's like, bring. I'm like, hello? And they're like, Cade? And I was like, why is this happening to me? And I was just like, who is this? And like, Cade? I was like, who is this, dude? What's going on? And she's like, you called me. And I was like, I promise you I've not been on my phone today. I was like, no, but definitely did not call you. And she's like, and then just hangs up. And I was just like, oh. And then I had that month of just terrifying, the carrying the knife around me 24/7. That's kind of what primed me into that. But essentially, I think that was the only way I ever would have considered putting my arrogance aside and say, okay, there might be someone who's got a lot more that he's dealing with, kind of like a Job situation in the book of Job, where he's like, you need to explain this to me. And God's like, no, you don't understand, actually. I think I needed that type of thing because I really connected with that book in particular. But yeah, that was an insane few weeks there, and eventually it needed to get me out of the city. And finally, I said, okay, I gotta leave. So I texted my landlord, said, I'm leaving. I gotta leave. I got 2 weeks left before the end of the month. I'm gonna just deal with the consequences of breaking the contract. I gotta get out of here. And so literally, when I faced the marketplace, a week later, booked a spot, and I moved. And me and Lee, and so the reason I brought up Leanne and Cruz is they came over. And I was like, okay, we got about a 45-minute window to move. And we have 2 trips to take, I think it was, or we got to fit all this stuff into a truck. But like, I need to be gone, and she needs to not realize that I have left this person because she lives on the same floor as me. I was like, my goal is to get out before this person realized
Yeah,
what had
yeah.
happened, and for me to just dip. And that was the goal, and it ended up happening. I have no idea. I haven't seen like her since then, so I have no idea what's going on there. But it was very terrifying, and so during that time too, I was praying for her because
Mm.
I didn't think she was particularly sinister, and I didn't think that she wanted what was bad for me. She was doing a lot of drugs. She was doing her own stuff. She had a bunch of things she was working through, and I was like, man, I pray that she's able to get some kind of situation like I'm in, where I'm getting closer to
Mhm.
God, and she had helped me in some ways with the deeper talks, getting me closer and questioning certain things, and so I just that whole time I was like praying for her, even though I was terrified the whole time. Um, Part of me was praying because I was like hoping that she would stop because it would help me out too. But man, at the same
Mm.
time,
The Lord's Prayer is going through my head right now, as you're saying this, and specifically, forgive us of our trespass, like forgive us of our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. Like, your heart to pray for her, even before, like, even in just becoming, into this relationship, like, that is wild because she still deserves prayer. Like, it, she,
definitely.
and it's crazy. Like, I guess what I'm trying to say is like the things that are bleak and are bad in those moments that are bringing us down, like you're literally having to move for your safety, actually moves you closer to God and what you were searching for. So it's
So much
like,
closer.
in the bigger scheme of things, she pushed you there
Yeah,
in the same way to push
100%.
you. But yeah, like it all happened in a way that God intended, for it to happen. And the story is just so interesting, man. Like, it's real. This is authenticity. Like, this is this is real for somebody else too. And I believe that
Yeah,
it needs to be shared. And I thank you for just saying all of these words. Like, this was like, what, last year or 2 years ago? How long ago was this?
this is just almost about a year. Right around this time is when I started to open up my eyes a little bit and say,
Yeah,
what's
yeah.
going on? I think I'm taking a lot of drugs, but I'm starting to finally feels like make a
Hmm.
step forward because I'm starting to at least because I never like I remember, and it's always been true that I was like down to stop doing drugs. I just like felt like there was something at the end of that road that would give me some kind of peace, and I guess in a roundabout
Yeah.
way it was true, but I never wanted to do them. I just like couldn't. Eventually I got hooked
Hmm.
on them, but like I never envisioned myself just doing them forever. I was like, nah. I mean, I do this because I'm
Hmm.
in such
Hmm.
pain internally that like I need to numb this somehow. And so that was the only real way I could do it was through those means. But I've shared honestly. This is probably the most details I've shared about this situation times like three. So I don't know how you got it out of me,
It's Holy
but
Spirit. Yeah.
because I never knew if it would make sense in context because some of the details I thought almost didn't need to be shared, but in a certain context, I knew at some point it would probably come out as something that would aid, kind of aid the context of the story. So yeah,
No.
nice. This is dope
Well,
because I really haven't worked on
no,
these
thank you.
things.
I think that, like, I think that it's just real. Like, when I say we pray, like, I mentioned this before, but like, we prayed before we started,
Yeah,
and one of the things I say is like, Holy Spirit got our tongue. Like, let us say the
yeah,
words that you would have us say that'll touch the hearts that need to be touched. And that's real. Like, stories like this aren't just stories, these are people's lives. This is your life. So I thank you for trusting burgeoning with it. um One of the things, well, we know that God gets the glory of just being being highlighted here in the story, but like, how does God get the glory in your life and in what you're doing as far as content creation and everything alongside of this story? Like, how do you see him in your I guess your career or just life in general now?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's like night and day the difference between doing content. Like I don't even know what I was doing. I couldn't even can't even fathom what I could have been doing or thinking about
Hmm.
before it all happened. But there's this thing I had read, and I don't remember who said it. It might have been C.S. Lewis or someone, and they had asked, hey, like, we need more Christian stories, I think. And he was like, no, we just need more Christians writing stories, actually. And I was like, oh, that's kind of powerful. And there was this thing where I was kind of researching the early church and some of the theology and history and stuff. And I was like, the idea of leaving something, instead of staying and fixing it, or staying and trying to be a light in that situation. You always can leave, but there are certain times maybe where you're called to stay and be that light. Like, some people will move into a Christian community, some people will stay in something that's other than that, to try and show people kind of what they're all about and stuff. And I don't think everyone's right for every single situation. Some people are really bad at that and should definitely not be in that situation. And it might be pride that's keeping them in there. But for me, I was like, okay, I'm in crypto. That's about as degenerate as it gets. That's about as grifty as it gets. There probably isn't more scams that happen more than in that industry. But that's also where innovation happens. So there's a bunch of amazing things happening too. So I was like, okay, well, do the pros outweigh the cons? Like, what is my position here? Should I leave? At this point, I was like, should I become a Christian content creator talking about the Bible and stuff? And I was like, no, that's crazy. I don't even know what I'm talking about yet. But at a certain point, I had racked up enough information where, like, my main goal was, like, I don't want some random talk to me on the street and ask me some question that just like derails me, kind of thing. I was, that's just what can't happen. The other stuff, I'm down to say, look, I don't know yet. I'm relatively new, whatever. But the simple things, like the main questions, like, well, how do you know this God is right, not this God? I had to get those things out of the way first, which I did. And I would rewatch and rewatch podcasts to get length, answers at length and context and history and stuff. And so I did make a channel that was kind of more based on faith and just like stuff about that, something that's a bit more. I try and be, I follow some of the trends because they're fun. I don't really monetize that channel because I'm doing it full time in crypto. But I had this other channel that was kind of an outlet at that time, and my friend Nate I'd been talking to him, and I was like, "Hey man, I'm trying to get back in crypto, but like I don't know how I'm supposed to do that because my eyes are open to all these things. I don't know if I can do this anymore." And he's like, "Dude, just make this other page, whatever you're thinking about right now." And I was like, "Okay, well, there's only one thing on my mind right now that I'm obsessed with. So just make it a TikTok or something. You just make some content. Don't try and go viral. Don't try and monetize. Just make stuff and just post it and see what happens." Like a month later, that account had like 50,000 followers on Instagram and TikTok. And it was just I was following The Chosen, essentially, just reacting to The Chosen content and then giving my thoughts on it. And then it slowly just, morphed to me telling a bit of storytelling and then some videos I thought might be helpful. But it's essentially like that channel is for people who like are kind of like me, where they didn't grow up with the faith as much and they need someone who kind of gets that side of it. But it's also like there is a standard here and sort of understands that side of it as well. But also it touches people who maybe have had God their whole life and they come in from a different angle. And maybe they don't think about how it looks to someone who doesn't have it for their whole life. And they're like, oh, this is like common sense. But it's like, no, it's not common sense to me. I'm just learning about that. Or that's not something I think about. Or because it's common sense for you, you overlook this thing, which is very real. And it's like a thing people are going through. And you write it off because you haven't dealt with it, because you've had God your whole life. But for someone who hasn't, they maybe turn to some of these things because they had no assurance of a savior. They didn't even know what that meant. And so that content's all about that. And I would say, that's probably the main thing. I met some cool people in my industry, the crypto industry, who are also Christian or who have something that they're aiming for that's not just more money. And that gave me a little bit of strength to keep going there. And also just to, I don't know, like, I would have watched these movies growing up of like certain characters like Aragorn from Lord of the Rings or Ned Stark from Game of Thrones, like these like super hyper hero type figures who like do what's right in the moment every single time kind of thing. And then sometimes they get stabbed in the heart at the end of it or whatever happens. But I was, I mean, I think every person is like, oh, that'd be so cool to be like that. I want to be like that one day. But I had like a real pull towards that growing up. It was like obsessive to the point where that's all I thought about, being that. And I would always, I wouldn't pray because I didn't know that's what it was before, but I would always like say that's where I'm aiming. Like that's where, like, if I could be that would be dope. If I could have a crazy life and crazy experiences, that would be dope. So I always asked for that. And I guess God was like, okay, like that's fine. I don't know if you know what you're asking, but like, if you go that way, and that's, and I think if internally that's where you truly want to be, you'll probably end up there. You may just not realize that's what it is in the moment. I think for me, I'm realizing that everything I basically asked for has come true in a roundabout way. And it was nowhere near what I thought it would be like. But that's kind of, I guess that's probably like a roundabout answer.
I think you answered it perfectly. God is getting the glory because you're living the walk. You're living your walk and you're doing it out loud. in every industry. I don't know if you're familiar with Pastor Torrey Roberts. He's a phenomenal speaker. He does a lot in a lot of different industries, but he wasn't into science. He wasn't into science, but he just got like an award and has been working and doing research in the science world. He's a pastor. Like that is his job. Well, not job, but that's his calling. But he had been speaking last year of the call, like of this extreme call for Christians to be in every industry. Like we need that. So what I'm seeing is that, and this is another reason why I'm doing burgeoning with so many different people in so many different industries, because we need to highlight like God and everything, because that's how we get people to the gospel. Like the Great Commission is for us to all go out and be disciples. And that's what it looks like. You know, it looks like starting a new page. Hey, I actually saw one of your videos on a different Christian page. You got like featured, and I was like strolling on Instagram. I was like,
oh yeah,
this is Cade. Like, this is Cade I went to college with.
oh man, that's funny. Yeah, there's a couple of videos. Well, a couple of videos I didn't think would go crazy on Instagram because I really didn't understand Instagram as a platform. I'd never gone viral before. And then just a couple of videos I didn't even think about that are just honestly like I don't even know if there was much value in the videos that I've done well. I feel like all the videos that I'm like, this video is helpful, it gets like nothing. And then I'm like,
yeah, no, I was like strolling. I was like, this is Kay. Like, wow, like God is on him, and I think that is where like the glory comes from. You know, like people being able to see you. You're touching people who may not have ever known Christ before or known Jesus. It's like I love the story of Saul. Paul, in the Gospels, he was literally trying to kill Christians. Like he was just, he was out there like, hey, I'm not following y'all. But then he became like one of the greatest influencers, So it's like those stories that it didn't look like this before, but it looks like this now, and God gets the glory. I think your answer was perfect. Yeah, it's definitely perfect. So with all of this journey that you're on, like I know there's a lot of learning going on, so I'm really curious to know, what are you learning, but what is one of the biggest lessons that you've learned?
I'd say it's way, way, way harder than I thought to be Christian. Like it's insanely harder than I thought it was going to be. And the first few months, I was like, bro, why is this is the move? Like, why isn't everyone this? It's so easy. Like, clearly, this is the way it is. Like, why isn't everyone doing all these things? And then as life I've re-entered life a little bit, you get responsibilities, you get duties you have to do, and then you're busy, 12 hours a day again. You're like, oh, wait, this is very difficult actually. But I think as part of the gig is like, he's like, yeah, dude, like, of course. He's like, you're supposed to take these things and somehow incorporate them in your life and then hopefully shine through enough where people are like, okay, that person's moving differently. Why? And in the content realm, at least, I was always able to the last few years. And that's something that people would notice in my industry, because a lot of crypto people aren't really content creators. So my content was 2 or 3 levels above them, just from a quality perspective. So people would say like, yeah, you move differently in the game because of the content side that you add, like the quality of the content side that you add with the camera and the lights and stuff. And so I was like, okay, well, that's good because I already have a leg up right there. But hopefully if I can move differently, on a deeper level than just the quality of the camera, that will also have people say, okay, I want to be close to that guy. What are some of the things he's doing? What are some of the things he believes? And for me, I was one of those people who would kind of like scoff at a Christian, or I'd be like, I can't believe you believe in some sky person. That's so ridiculous. There's like no proof of this man. There's no reason to like even question it, whatever. And then I look back afterwards now, and I'm like, oh wow, there was like multiple situations in my life, multiple instances where I would meet someone who's like extremely good, and I was like, man, these guys are like way good. What's wrong with them? And then I'm like, oh, like I found out like somehow in a roundabout ways, oh, they were Christian or they were Catholic or something like that. And I was like, oh wow, like that, now that makes sense. And I think at the time I was like, it's so cheesy, because at that time, nothing that a Christian does sounds particularly interesting to me. I was like trying to do all the gnarly stuff, and that's some of the stuff that they would sort of condemn. And so I think with some of the things I'm learning is like, how do I reach people who are like me, a slightly bit arrogant in ways where they would like, why should I even do this thing? Why should I believe that? What good could it possibly bring me to set standards in my life? And I'm like, well, there's a way to think about that where if you were to meet people who you either looked up to or respected, that they did those things, you would start to question your ways. Maybe you're not seeing some of the results that you should be seeing. And typically you would just scoff and say, well, I know what I'm doing. There might be one moment where you say, you know what, maybe I should listen to him for just like one day or like one video or something. And maybe the right video hits your timeline. Maybe God says, okay, it's today, and says, okay, it's time. And so that's kind of what I'm learning is that's kind of the impact you can have, but it only works if you like do it. And I'm starting to realize it's way harder because I look at myself and I'm like, I can do it a lot of the times. But I for sure many times will fail, or everyone's got their kind of like habitual things that they come back to, something that maybe they done for many years, like cycles. Like a lot of the guys, it's definitely porn because they got it when they were in middle school, or they Googled it when they were 9 years old or something like that. That's certainly the case for people like myself and many people that I know. Is that's the one that people struggle with. And it's probably the hardest one because it literally severs you. Because like not in a way where you're like, yo, you're bad, but it's like you feel it.
It's that guilt,
it's
that
like very
self-shame,
difficult to go watch
almost,
something like that.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's like guilt and shame, which should be there when you do something that's no bueno. You shouldn't be like, oh, this is good, man. I'm so grateful that I did that. Got so happy that I did that, man. Like, no, it's like usually when that happens, if you know that it was objectively wrong, it's hard for you to go and say, okay, now I'm going to turn to the Bible. I'm going to go.
I can't come back.
I feel a little bit of like Adam and Eve.
I got to cover myself. I got to cover. Yeah. Totally. Yeah.
There's huge wisdom in the Bible. It's like absurd how much wisdom there is in that Bible. And so one thing I'm learning is the days I don't read that book, it is extremely noticeable when I don't read that book every day. So I'm hoping that is something I never stop doing. Just daily, just even if it's a page
verse,
or just one little verse or something. It's like medicine. It's like it's like sustenance.
I totally agree. I think I could empathize with you in that I'm still learning. Well, I don't think we're ever going to stop learning how hard it is to be a Christian. Like to follow God, to walk in faith and just, live. Everybody's faith is different. Like some people have like crazy faith, but some people have like crazy faith, but not necessarily is as disciplined, or some people are extremely disciplined, but their faith is like little. So it's like that constant, like trying to be a balanced person with all of the things.
Yeah.
That's why we have the power of repentance. I think that it's a hard thing to understand though. Like, okay, I can repent and ask for forgiveness, even though I feel shame and guilt, because sometimes we look at, I think society has pushed us to a place where like, oh, if you're bad, if you've done something bad, then you're a bad person. And that's like literally the opposite of Christianity, is saying like, no, you come as you are, for real. Like you can come to me, like God is saying, you can come to me in your shame. You can come to me in your guilt. You can come to me in the ugly, like all of it. I'm going to accept that and I'm going to wash you clean. And
it's like the shower analogy. Like George Janko said that one time. He was like, you get in the shower to be cleaned. You don't clean yourself, then get in the shower. So you typically go in the shower.
Yeah.
Cleanses you. He's like, that's kind of what it's like.
Yeah, that is so good. That is so good. The thing is though, like we learn and we can learn to break the cycles. Like the enemy cannot be at all like God. So like the Job story where the enemy literally came and asked, like, who can I bother? And God said, have you tried my servant Job? Like the enemy can only emulate the things of God. That's why cycles exist, because God created seasons. Like the earth runs in seasons, but the cycles are like short-term things that you can break them. You cannot break a season. Like winter is going to come. Summer is going to come. Like all of these seasons are going to happen. But with cycles, like we are able to break them, but the enemy is a trickster. So it's like in our head, I have to come back to this, or I will come back to this. No, you're strong enough to like break apart. I actually also had like a porn addiction for a little while, and it's hard to think about. Like I was telling my story to a group of people before. I also think this is kind of weird because I was like also a person who was like, I don't know if I'm going to be on the street like spreading the gospel. Like I don't know how this is going to look, but now I just talk about God everywhere. Like not confined to anything to do it. But we're just sitting, and it was a nail appointment, honestly. Like, we're just sitting at this nail appointment. We just started talking. We did a prayer circle and all, like, in the middle of this girl's like little shop. Yeah. It's crazy. But I started telling them my story about like how I was really like stuck on porn and like all of that stuff, but I'm also like trying to practice abstinence now. And they're like, I can't believe that was you. Like, believe it when you hear it. But also, like, if I am able to, an imperfect person who fails every single day, like, if I am able to break a cycle for myself, like, you are able to break that cycle for yourself. We just have to pray against it, try our hardest to not do it, and then say, like, in my guilt and my shame, I'm not going to allow myself to go away from God. Because like you said, the Bible is medicine. The word of God is medicine. Like, prayer is medicine, fasting is medicine. All of that stuff will heal us from that guilt and shame. I just want to like say, don't allow your failures, your shortcomings to stop you from seeking God.
Yeah, I love what you said about the seasons. Yeah, the seasons is very powerful. What you said about winter's coming, he also put that there on purpose. Like, the devil can only do what God even allows in the first place. So it gives you a bit of context when you're nervous about something. That's been probably the biggest thing that's helped me. Like, there have been a couple opportunities I said yes to that I never would have said yes to because I've been way too nervous. Like, I'm not qualified. There's no way I could handle that. I've got too many things on my plate. But now I'm like, yeah, but even if I did, and even if it does blow up in my face, God's still with me in that time, and He'll be with me if I say no. If I say yes or no, He's gonna be like, okay, cool. So that's powerful. And like the other thing is that each person has the things that they're good at and the things that they're bad at, and somehow this melting pot that is all of humanity and every human that's ever existed, God still has a handle on it all. He's got a plan for it. He's like, that's fine. It's like, you can do this thing, you can mess up here, and this thing will happen over here. So this is all taken care of. I mean, you look at the Bible, it's literally 1,000 stories over and over again of that same thing. It's like every person in that book, aside from one person, struggled with something, and each time he still used them for something good, and it bounced to the next person, to the next. David's got this problem, Solomon's got this problem, this person's got this problem, and they all have this one thing they struggle with. They also have some things that they're really good at. Like for me, I would say faith is probably my strongest thing because I've always had it. I didn't even know what it was before, but I always had faith in something that it would somehow work out or something. And there was really no moment where that was ever in question. I always believed that existed. And for me now, like, now that I know God is real, there's no question of like, I'm only 25, so it's always possible, but there's no thing that could happen that would make me question, like, is there actually a person who designed this place? I'm like, no, I have way too much evidence and also personal evidence that in fact exists. So there's no, like, even if something horrible happens, it would be in the context of there's still God. Like, the context of that remains, and that's like a faith thing that I have. Yet there's things that other people have that I have weaknesses in that I'm really, really not that great at, or I question on a day-to-day basis that they're like, no, that's the thing for me that I never question because X, Y, Z.
That is so beautiful. Like, having faith, I think that is just my prayer constantly, to like grow my faith and to know that there are people like you who've had it, period. That's like inspirational, because faith is everything. We need it so bad. Like, we can live by the book, and if you don't have faith, like, you're not really living by the book. Like, you're outside of it. Like, the biggest stories in the Bible, not even the biggest, all of the stories in the Bible are stories where people with faith, imperfect people, had enough faith to just do it in some kind of way, and some of them failed. A lot of them were, successful in it, but no matter what, like you said, God used all of the stories, and that is what God is doing here still today, so having faith is so important to just keep going forward.
The Chosen does a great job of showing that. It shows like each of the disciples. It's like a show following the disciples on their journey with Jesus. It's like a story about what that could have been like, what it could have felt like to see this thing happen, or to be here during this miracle, or to be one of the disciples when something intense really happens, and seeing because it's not like, the Bible is relatively short in comparison to like their life, right? So it's only a few pages, right? So like there's a bunch of details that are missed, but like they had just as many thoughts as we have 100,000 thoughts per day. they're sitting there and they're like, oh my God, like Jesus is right there. He's like chilling, like healing this person. I'm sitting here going like, yo, I gotta, like, I'm really hungry, or like this person said this to me earlier, and like I'm kind of annoyed about it. But then like they have to move forward in spite of that. And then certain people, pick a disciple or whatever. He's got their, he or she has their strengths. And then there's some people who don't, like Thomas need to touch. And then the others were like, nope, he's right there. Like, I believe it. But it's different times. Either way, he was still right there in front of him saying, okay, I believe in you. I just don't believe maybe this specific circumstance. I'm not sure about this one because of his mindset and stuff. But it still works. It's like the cool thing. It's so weird because I think before I had become Christian, I thought that life was so confusing that there's no hope of figuring any of it out. So why bother with any of it? And when I became Christian, I was like, no, there is a bunch of mystery here. And there's like, in fact, there's so much mystery around God in the world. But in context of a Christian worldview, it actually somehow makes sense in a way. And it starts to be contextualized in a way where you don't go crazy. Or I wouldn't say if you just become Christian, maybe it gives you a leg up. But if you do, so I guess some of the research and you start to see like what they actually believe. Like if you read, it would be hard. I guess it'd be hard in a Protestant situation because many of the churches believe different things. But if you read like a catechism, or if you like asked a bunch of like priests or pastors or whatever, like what exactly they believe, and they have certain things that they believe, then those for the most part are in line. And when you contextualize that into the world, it actually makes like way more sense. So for people who haven't really found God, but they're like trying to understand the world and they just haven't given this one a shake, that's kind of, I try to talk to those people because I actually get it very, very intimately, and it's still relatively new for me. So I'm able to kind of break down some of those barriers that they're dealing with. Like there's a couple of times where I would be in a situation where for some reason the conversation came about where they're like, oh, like you're Christian, and then they like scoffed, but they weren't being super arrogant about it, but enough to me to like my ears to perk up and be like, oh, like that's where you're at with it. Cool. Let me see if I can break down 2 or 3 of your questions. Obviously, I'm not going to convert you to Jesus right here. That'd be crazy. Like unless some.
I be trying. Would you like to give your life to Jesus Christ?
Yeah, I mean, in certain settings, maybe it's possible, but sometimes I'm like, look, I just want to break down a couple questions she has to at least not scoff next time. To at least go, oh, you're Christian. And instead of scoff, just say, okay, like that's interesting. Maybe those build up. Eventually she's like, wow, like I met like 10 people who I think are pretty cool, and they all are Christian for some reason. Maybe I'm missing something, which is basically where I was at. Maybe I'm missing something. I need to go research this. I need to humble myself for a second. I actually haven't done any research on this. I've just had a couple thoughts on it, and I watched like one YouTube video 9 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah. It's about planting seeds to change heart postures. You know, that's all we're all doing when we're at least taking the time to say like I'll do a little bit. Like this is my little bit. Maybe the seed that you planted, Cade, will be a seed that I have to water in somebody in the future. You get what I'm saying? Like, and then that seed will grow. It will grow in them, and God will take care of it. But at the very least, we are doing our parts in giving somebody the opportunity to know of Jesus, you know? And I think that's what this is all about. Like just giving people the opportunity to just know of Jesus, to know of God, to know of his glory. And we live lives that reflect it in some way, in the best ways that we can, you know? We are at the end of our show. But before we completely end, I love to do this. We flip roles for a second, and I allow you to ask me a question. So you've given me you put me all in your business, so you can you can get into mine just a little bit.
Oh man. Okay. Let's see. It's cool because we have kind of the history, how we had first met. Like that was back in 20. That'd have been 2017 maybe, or 2018.
Yes. Well, 2018 for sure. It was 2018, but that's so long ago. We're old.
That is a very, very long time ago. And it is interesting because we had some kind of chemistry or something. It's crazy because now with this podcast, maybe we show Steph this. I don't know if this would make sense to show Steph this podcast. I have no idea. But I haven't talked to her in a little while.
Same,
but it is nuts that I remember also thinking, I was like, yeah, she's so cool. She's so dope. Like, nice. Like it's good that we're partners. Like this is great. Yeah. And we did, I feel like we did a really good job. And we talked to a lot of people. And for me, I didn't even, didn't even know really what was going on. I tried to just do the best job I could.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe part of it came from pride, to like be the best, or to, like I think I joined a lot of jobs growing up to, maybe if I saw someone doing an orientation job that wasn't very good, I was like, okay, well, I'm going to go do that job, and I'm going to do it in a way where like someone like me could feel more comfortable. I think that's the main reason I did the orientation job, is because when I went to an orientation, they like missed a bunch of stuff where I was like, oh man, like I was looking for this kind of experience. I'm going to give that experience to someone new.
Yeah.
And I also saw that kind of like fire within you.
Mm-hmm.
But you've been out of college for a few years, and you've entered the workforce, and like we've gone through life in the last few years post college. What is kind of your observations on society right now? Like, where are you at? Because you grew up with the idea of the knowledge of God and stuff like this, very different. But we live in the same world.
Yeah.
Like, where have you seen, like, what are you observing about the reality? You're online a little bit on social media. There's a bunch of stuff going on. There's like a whole nother reality online that it seems, because that's where people reside. But what are your thoughts on the current state of things?
Oh, this is a really good question. Like, I haven't gotten one like this season, so I appreciate it. Going back from where we were as like essentially children compared to who we are, like we were really, really baby adults, like, and early 20s, late teens, almost. I had this fire in me to change the world, like in college. Like, I just wanted to change the world. I was studying like prison systems and things like that. I had, God in me, but I wasn't really like necessarily, oh, I'm just Christian or I'm one way or another. Like, I grew up Christian, but I didn't really have this idea of what that really, really was, like a personal relationship with God. Like, I prayed and stuff, but it wasn't this. It wasn't this at all. But I knew that I needed to serve in my life. Like, that's part of the reason why I joined orientation, is like you said, to serve people and make them feel good when they enter college, because we also started at spring. Both of us started in the spring of our freshman year, right? Like, yeah, so that was another thing that kind of brought us together. But like, it was weird. Like, that acclimation was weird. But I knew that I wanted to change. And so my view of society, like going through college and studying like African American studies and just like politics and things like that, I was always like mad. And I saw it through a very like, we're burning lens. And then I got out of college and I was like, no, we're not just burning. I'm in the fire too. Like, I feel the fire and this is kind of bad. And so I knew that I needed to seek God, but like you said, like your story is similar to mine. Like, I was more like trying to do it spiritual and not bring Jesus in it. So my view was really depressive, and because I was experiencing it and I didn't have like a lot of money, and I just felt like, God, like, why am I a first generation college student? Why did you put this passion on me to serve when like I need to be served? I need somebody to come here and drag me up, like pull me up. And so like God did, he pulled me up. And now like I see that there is just a need to serve. Like, there's still a need to serve no matter where I am. Like, Jesus said, I come so the least can come first. And that's what we have to do. Like, we walk in these paths where we may have little, like Jesus, I don't want to say this for real, but like, he was kind of homeless. Like, he was just going with the flow. Like, he told all the disciples to go out and like stay with people. And if they don't appreciate you in their house, then you go to the next house because somebody will. So it's like now I did service like before we got on this call, and we were downtown Atlanta, and I saw like this. We were just really in face to face, like with people experiencing homelessness. And I was trying to find a bathroom, and all of the shops that had bathrooms and that were open, they wouldn't allow us to use the bathroom. And the reasons were like, we've had incidents, like not even customers only. And it's just like, we know why though. Like, without them saying it, they said it, So just with like all of the things that I'm like really passionate about, I see where Jesus modeled the same things in the Bible. Like, being under Roman rule and having like these crazy taxes, but also having to live with these strong religious leaders who were kind of taking advantage of them as well. Like, this is the world that Jesus came to save, you know? So I look at it like that. Like, this is the world. It has a lot going on, but we have to have enough faith and enough will to change it. And I think that being a Christian now, like, there are some times where I just want God to myself. But God is not just the God of Leah. God is not just the God of Cade. God is the God of all of us, you know, of all of this world. And with all the things that are going on in it, I have the eyes and the heart to know that my light that I'm letting shine has to shine to every single person in it. Every time I come into contact with somebody, I want them to see God, to have some sort of light in the darkness. Because if not, then I'm just, you know, contributing to people feeling like they're on fire. Because in some way, like, the world is still really hot. It's still really on fire, but we are here. I know that I am here. My life is dedicated to making people feel comfortable in it and allowing them to see good and peace and real community, because that is something that we don't have enough of. And that's where I see society. Like, we're needing more conversations like this, more people who have the faith and just the heart to change it.
Yeah, people are looking. They're like looking for people to say anything, and they're big celebrity people who are now talking about it a little bit. It can get dangerous because that can start to become its own game almost on social media, which I'm starting to see a little bit, because it's like it's becoming like in to like be like, oh, I'm religious, because it's like the anti-party against total degeneracy. And but I can tell because of the numbers that I'm seeing for some of these people and some of these stories and videos that people are like desperately searching for a deeper meaning, and it does not exist without God. Like, God is that deeper meaning, and it's about, for me, it's about the vocabulary of how I meet them in the same way God meets everyone where they need to be. It's like, for me, maybe for me, that's just them being with me for a day, and maybe there's a couple situations where they would maybe have reacted differently, but I don't, and then maybe they see my stuff, and then maybe they connect, and then maybe I'm just one of the stepping stones for them. But for me, it's like, okay, like, they're looking for something deeper, and a lot of times if they're around me, that's because we have that part in common. And so it's like, how is there some way that I can shine in a way where it gets them drawn to God in a way? And I don't know if you've noticed this. I don't know if this is like a person-to-person thing or what, but I saw some like art piece of when someone is like sparked with like the fire of like the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit's the one thing that I'm still learning about. It's just the one thing that's like not talked about as much. Like, as far as understanding, you know, who he is in relationship to the Trinity and things like this. But before before my conversion, this was like a overnight thing. But I went from you know, when you get like goosebumps or something, and you get like the shivers. So I would get that every now and then. It wasn't like a common thing, not enough to like notice it as a thing. After I was converted, there would be like, every time there was like true conviction that I aligned with, it would automatically be met with like this full. It felt like my body would glow white internally, all the way through my spine and through my back. But it was like shivers. But it's like the only way I can use. That's the only word I can think of. But it's like the it like vibrates almost differently, and it's like through every fiber in my body. But like, when I find something that's like either worthy of conviction or something that I feel true conviction in, it like physically lights my body up every time, to the point where you know, maybe there are periods where I don't feel it as much, and it might be when I'm not you know, in line with God. But it's like, to the point where I'm like, what's going on? Like, why does this keep happening? Like, it's like, is it a reminder? Like, how am I supposed to use this? But I'll feel these like big conviction moves, and I have no idea what the role is. I'm just grateful that they exist now, and that's like I have a totally different mindset towards things happening just in life. It's like, okay, great, I'm very grateful for that. Like, actually, this is the question I was going to ask you that I forgot. I couldn't think of on the spot, but I have like 3 small prayers that I ask for that begin my day, end my day, throughout my day. I say them like 1,000 times, but like 3 real like requests, I guess, in my prayers. Was wondering if you have any of those, like anything that you always come back to, short little prayers, things that give you a bit of comfort in a moment, things like that.
I do. I do. I've been told like my whole life that I'm a leader, and there was a time where I was just like following people. So I'm praying like Holy Spirit guide me in the leadership that you have for me. Like I know that I am a leader. I have this is a ministry, you know. Um, with this being a ministry, and then I have like the other things that I do. Like I want people to see God in me. So like, Lord, let me decrease so that you may increase. That is like my every single
Mm,
day prayer, no matter what. Like, give me your peace and allow me to decrease so that you may increase, and provide me with the wisdom to lead as you have me lead. Those are my prayers, like constantly. Um,
wow.
and it's just so that like when I am going out in the world and I have this servant posture, like this servant leader posture, like I know that I'm not allowing myself to get in the way. Like I can't, it's not about Leah, you know. Is really not. Like I have to take care of my vessel. I have to take care of my mind and stuff and make sure like I'm filling myself up with God and things like that. But like when I am here in this role of touching his people, like I want them to receive that light, like that you were explaining, that's on the inside of you. Like there's a song that's like there's a fire that's on the inside of me that I can't, you know, that I can't control. Like that is it. That fire, I don't want the control of it. Like I want God to control it. I want the Spirit of God, when he possesses me, to be seen as the Spirit of God. It does not have anything to do with Leah. Like I just praying for me to be humbled always, you know.
You did that too. You were one of the people that orientation at least. Like if I had to do something that like it's like the grunt work part, like hey, grab that table. You pretty much would grab the table with. I was like, okay, great. Like I could if we were teamed up, I was like, okay, sweet. I don't have to do everything,
Yes,
which was
yes.
nice.
No, I'm gonna get my hands dirty. Like that's something I just always have. Then there's just
Yeah.
something that I've always done. Like my mom, she was like a single mom, and we grew up very humbly, and she's like, if you need to change a tire, you're going to get down there and you're going to change the tire, because like there is not always going to be somebody to save you, you know. Jesus saves,
Mm.
he'll send somebody along the way. But one of the things about like living in faith is like we gotta work. Like faith without works is dead. So sometimes you have to pick up that table if there's something that needs to get done. Like we have to be servant leaders in that. Like we're not just. That's what Jesus was doing. Like
Yeah.
he was out there preaching. He got in the boat. He calmed the storms. He did the miracles, but he was walking with them. You know, he wasn't just placed on the pedestal. You know.
Yeah. Wow. That's powerful. That's powerful. Yeah. The walking with God is powerful. Not to draw this conversation on, but when I had read that in I think it was Abraham, and it was like God walks. I forget if it was God walks with Abraham or
Mhm.
Abraham walks with God, but that line stuck out to
Mhm.
me for some reason. So I would always ask for God to walk with me, and then to be patient because I am super stubborn sometimes, and take forever to sometimes
Yeah.
get the message. I just honestly, I'm like, just thank you for giving me the breath. Like Genesis was also
Yes.
super powerful for me to read the story of
Mhm.
creation, and he breathed air, and I was like, wait a second, this man breathed life, existence just from his breath. I'm like, that's insane. That's like
Yeah,
he
no,
is him.
and that
I
is his
was like,
name.
that's
I
insane.
am. Like that's what
So
when Moses
yeah,
asked him what is your name? He said, I am. I am that I am. And that translates to Yahweh. And if you ever think of Yahweh, it does not have vowels as it is spelled in the Hebrew translation. Is like YWHW or something like that. Um,
mhm.
but it is the sound of breath. Like that is the sound. So when
Right.
we literally
Breathe.
breathe, we're breathing his name. There's no other, like we are saying the name of
Wow.
God constantly. God is in our every breath. So yeah, I agree with that. Like the creation story always is wild to me, but
It hits me. It's my pin. It's always been my pinned video, even though it doesn't have a million views. It always stays pinned because it's just me reading Genesis right there. It's just so powerful. Every time I read it, I'm like, it's
mhm.
like boom. You're like, oh my gosh, like I'm very grateful to to have been like I don't even know what the word is, but I'm just glad that he involved me in his gift
Yes.
because life is a lot more meaningful when yeah, like when you realize life is in context of reality and not just some random idea of what you think it might be based on a couple new age
Yeah.
books that you read, but like in context of what's truly real, objective reality, you're like, wow, this matters so much. Like people, the Christian believes there's all this stuff after, but it's in context with this also mattering
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
much too. But it's man, it's just I'm so glad to not be stumbling through the dark with like half of a candle and then total
Amen.
darkness
Yeah.
around me and just running wherever makes sense. But to have someone be like,
Yeah.
hey, I'm this way.
Yeah.
You can aim this way. You can actually trust me. I'm
Yeah.
not going to grift you. I'm not going to trip you along the way. He's like, I do have your best intentions here. Or my intentions are actually
Yes.
pure. You can actually trust me. To have that after every single hero of mine, I might learn about later. Oh, they had a DUI. Oh, they like attacked their wife on a daily basis. And I'm like, oh wow, like you guys all suck. Actually, I can't put my faith in any of you guys. Like, who am I going to put my faith in? And eventually, this man with a capital J walks in. He's like, I'm that guy. I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, great.
Yeah.
Finally.
Yeah.
So,
This has been so beautiful, Cade. Thank you so much for sharing your story. And we could really talk about this all day, but for the purpose of this podcast, unfortunately, we're going to exit out right now. But I'm so grateful to have had you here, to have heard your story, and I'm so excited to see what God continues to do in your life. Like, you are a light, and I am so glad that you came here to share it. Do you have anything else that you would like to give today? Like any just drops of wisdom?
No. I'm just grateful. I'm grateful that we came together, got to have this talk and reconnect, and it's helpful for me to get these thoughts out onto paper. Like there's definitely benefits to either writing it or speaking it out loud or something like this to get the thoughts out there, out of the brain jumbling around. So I'm grateful for that, and I can't even describe after so many years of stumbling to have a foothold on something that is outside of myself. It is truly it's like freedom.
Yeah, no, I'm grateful to have had you. So y'all, I just want to say, like, if you relate to any part of our stories, we're just imperfect people trying our best every single day, and we love God. We love Jesus Christ, and we're in different parts of our walk, but still relating, and that is what it is. So I pray that the words of this podcast, the words of these stories are just a little sprinkle on top of the overflow that God already provides. And I'm wishing you all a happy burgeoning. May God be with you. And until next time, this has been Burgeoning the Podcast, and I am Leah J with a lot to say. Peace out, y'all.